After 29 years here doing the morning show at what they call the White House of Talk, Tim Denis is calling it a career. He was gracious enough to sit down with me after a morning roundtable session to reflect on 47 years in the broadcasting industry.
Joining us live in studio this morning, Ted Moradian, 1% of Ted Moradian, just 1% of
Just 1%. Tim, we talked about 4 years ago, you were celebrating 25 years here, and I reviewed that this morning. And at the time,
ruin your morning.
but at the time you said retirement wasn't in the cards. You weren't looking to it yet.
I wasn't, and it's funny because up until this last year, I really haven't even thought about it. And suddenly before Christmas, I just looked at, I'm got a milestone year coming up in terms of my age. I'm going to be turning 65 next month, and my wife and I sat down and just thought about the things we wanted to do with our lives and the things going forward. And I kind of want to do a lot of those things while I'm still able to do it. And to be brutally honest, I sat down and thought that now is the time to pass this off to somebody younger who can take the radio show into the next generation. Somebody did that for me years ago, back in the days when Frank Proctor was the morning show host here and Dave Forrester, and it was a time when they said, okay, it's our time to move on. And they did that for me, and I thought, don't hang on, turn this over, and Steph Vivier will be taking over for me beginning very, very soon, and taking Niagara in the Morning into another generation, another decade.
47 years, you've mentioned some names. Who are some of the other names that, when you look at who your influences were in the broadcasting world, who are they?
There are two or three that really influenced me. One I worked with, as you did, back at 1220 with John LaRock, and I had been in broadcasting quite a while by the time I got to that radio station, and John at the time in the Niagara region was known as the Mayor of the Morning. And he taught me what it meant to be a real morning host, which was not necessarily going on and taking hot takes on things and bad-mouthing and getting mad and screaming and yelling. It was being a part of the community. It was going out and doing events. It was remembering names of people in the community and trying to talk about the things that people would bring up while they were having coffee at Timmy's one morning.
Other names? You said there were top three?
If I look back, there were some sports people. There were people like Doug Hobbs. There were people here years ago. John Michael, who did a talk show here for a long time. Again, a number of other radio stations in the Niagara region. And to be quite honest, and this may surprise you, one of my biggest influences was when I was growing up listening to Larry King overnight radio, which was my love when I was growing up. And I spent so much time playing in bands and driving around at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning and listening to Larry King talking to people as though they were right there with them. And I listened to Larry, I read his book, I took to heart the things that he said about broadcasting. For instance, when you're talking to an author, Larry did something that nobody else did, which was tell people, as a host, don't read the book. Don't read the book. Ask the questions that the listener would have. Because the moment you read the book, then it makes it sound like you know what you're talking about and they know what you're talking about and you're excluding the listener.
Take me back to those young days in Port Colborne. So you were listening to Larry King. What else were you doing? What made you decide you really wanted to get into broadcasting?
I've told the story before about growing up when I was a young guy listening to the radio under my pillow. I had a little transistor radio. It was a realistic, and I would listen to radio at those times years ago. You could get what they called clear channel radio stations from across North America. You would listen to those and get a perspective from around the world, and that fascinated me. And I listened to these hosts from New York and Nashville, and I wanted to do that. I thought I could talk to people like that. I could talk to these fascinating guests that they have on every night. And so I began to tell people in my school that I wanted to do that. And suddenly they said, okay, why don't we get you doing the morning announcements? So every morning I would sit at high school and do all the morning announcements instead of the principal. And eventually I just said, let's make a living out of this.
Was that back at Port Colborne High?
I was back at Port High, yeah. My principal at the time was, you may not remember, Ralph Hogue was the guy's name. And he said to me, I don't want to do these announcements in the morning. Why don't you do them?
Niagara in the Morning with Tim Dennis.
Yeah.
Okay, there's two Tims in Niagara. Tim Hortons, people stop at Tim Hortons, people tune into you. What is someone's normal routine? Dropping by the drive-through at Tim Hortons to pick up their morning coffee, tuning into CKTB to listen to Tim Dennis. Where do you go from there? And how do you reflect on the importance that you've had in this community for as long as you've had it?
I have had so many cards, letters, emails, text messages over the past couple of weeks since my announcement of retiring saying that. And there's been nothing more flattering or emotional for me than hearing people say, I wake up to you every morning. I don't know what my morning's going to be like. Because that's what I started out wanting to do. And when you get to this point in your career and you realize you've been able to achieve that and achieve what some of the people that I listened to. I remember listening to people like Norman B. on CHOW or Brian H. Masters years ago or John LaRock or Tom Charrington in Hamilton. I wanted to achieve that, and I never thought that I would get there, and heaven knows I didn't realize I had until the last couple of weeks.
What else is in the plans for retirement? A lot of travel, those kinds of things?
I mean, that's cliche. We're going to travel a lot. I want to travel while I still have the ability to travel and do all the walking involved. And we've got a couple of trips planned. Got some theater to work on. I've licensed recently to be able to officiate at weddings, so I'm going to be doing a lot of that over the next little while. And and I have 11 grandkids. 6 kids and 11 grandkids, so it's not like I'm going to be short on things to do. And thank you for being there. Don't worry, we've got news coming up next and weather, and then I'll see you tomorrow morning for the Tuesday edition at 5 a.m. I'm Tim Dennis. See you then.